Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our Women in Leadership series featuring Desiree Motamedi. I am so excited for our chat today.
Same. Thanks for the invite. So excited to be here.
Of course. I'm honored to have you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for everyone for joining. I love that we have people from all over the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you're joining us from. This is going to be a really fun conversation. Des is a global marketing leader at Shopify. She has a wealth of really, really impressive leadership experience. She used to be a leader at Meta and Google. And you know why I'm particularly really excited to talk to her? Because one, she's so real and just so easy to have a conversation with. And then two, she is very well admired and loved by her teams. I don't see that level of caliber coming in. You know, we host amazing leaders, and I think just having that quality is so rare. And what was really cool was when I shared that we were hosting Des for a Fireside chat, I had a few people reach out to me and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're interviewing Des. I was on her team and she's amazing. So it got me even more excited, not surprised, just more excited. Des, your reputation precedes you. I am really excited to dive into your career journey today, how you've advocated for yourself, how you had the confidence to correct an executive at a company event at Google. I want to hear all about that.
Yeah.
No, you are a powerhouse. This is going to be such an awesome conversation. So thank you again for joining us.
Of course. Looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Shivani. I am the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer an online leadership program for women. Our mission is to elevate 100,000 women into leadership. It's a big way. We need to create the change that we need to see in today's workplaces. And we're doing it. We've had graduates from Fortune 500 companies and tech disruptors get promoted faster, move up in their organization, and have a voice at the table after completing the program. So much of the program has been curated by senior leaders who've actually been in your shoes. I really think we need to have open and honest conversations around what it takes to succeed in your career, what it takes to move into management. And that's why I'm excited for our conversation today. Today, Des and I are going to chat for about 30 minutes. And then we'll take questions from all of you. So as we're having the conversation, please add or upload any questions, bottom right icon on your Zoom screen. And I want this to be really fun and valuable for all of you. So if you really like something, drop it in the chat. And reminder again to change your settings to everyone instead of host and panelists so we can all see it. All right, Des. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so pumped. Let's dive right in.
Great.
Let's go beyond your LinkedIn profile. And if you can share about your career journey, just give us a peek. You know, LinkedIn, everything looks so perfect. So I'm sure there's some ebbs and flows. So let's give us the deets.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, I guess my life story or my career story, and it's an interesting one. I'm from the Bay Area, born and raised. My parents live in the same house I grew up in, Los Gatos. And I went to UC Santa Cruz. I was going to be a psychology major, or I was a psychology major, I should say that. And I graduated and was thinking I was going to be a teacher. That was kind of the path. And of course, it was 1999, and it was definitely the tech boom. I remember a friend of mine had said, hey, Des, there's this job fair in downtown San Jose. You should come with me, see what it's all about. And I was like, all right. So sure enough, I went with them, and I was there for probably 15 minutes, and I felt very out of place. It was definitely the time of where people were looking for developers, C++ coders. It was just the time and the dawn of the internet really kind of coming to life. And I was about to leave, and all of a sudden this guy saw me and said, hey, come over here. Let me see your resume. And I showed it to him, and he said, I might have something for you. You should call me on Monday. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I decided to go home, had my merry way. And sure enough, he called me on Monday and said, hey, I'd love for you to come in and have a chat for a marketing associate role. And it was a company called Interwoven. Unfortunately, they're no longer in existence, but at the time they were a web content management platform. And I went in, I met with 3 people on that day. It was Tuesday. And the next day they offered me a role, and I was flabbergasted. And I remember calling my parents, because they're very traditional Persian parents. And I was like, I got a job. And they were like, what do you mean? What did you get a job at? And I explained to them that I got a job as a marketing associate job at this tech startup called Interwoven. And at the time, I know when I'm thinking about it now, it was the job offer was for $32,000 a year. And at that time, that was a lot of money. And it still is today, but it was a lot of money. And I was just so excited to kind of get into this world. And so I started off doing trade shows, helping out with, marketing collateral. And then my boss at the time was like, Des, we really want to start doing more online events. Can you help us with webinars? And started going into that path. And then I started doing that for about a year or so. And then they're like, Des, could you move to London? And I was like, wait, what? You want me to move to London? And at the time I was like 24, 25 years old. So I moved to London and started field marketing for the company there for EMEA. And so I was traveling all over the place, trying to build a team. And it was such a crazy experience, as you can imagine. But this was the time where the web was really growing. I mean, it was a different time. And so lots of, orders were coming in every direction, lots of money flowing. And it was an amazing time. So did that for about 2 years, came back. And the CMO at the time was like, okay, you want to do some partner marketing? So I'd started doing partner marketing for about a year. And then sure enough, they said, hey, Des, we need you to move to APAC. Can you move to Singapore? So I moved to Singapore for 2 years and covered APAC. And it was the most amazing experience. And again, started to build a field marketing organization when I was there. So after that stint, it was interesting because my CMO at the time left the company. And I decided to follow him just because he was such a big advocate for me. And I went and did a little small startup for a small amount of time where I was doing kind of like sales stuff. And I'll be very honest with you, it just wasn't in my DNA. So I was there for a short amount of time. And then a friend of mine said, hey, Adobe's hiring. They're hiring for enterprise marketing. And I was like, interesting. They do enterprise, because I was very familiar with like Creative Suite, and that was kind of their core product at the time. And so sure enough, I moved over to Adobe and did field marketing there for my first stint and loved it, fell in love with it, and fell in love with Adobe. It was such an amazing company. It's actually where I learned a lot of my marketing chops, I'd say, because it's one of the older tech companies in the Bay Area as well. And then from there, I had this wonderful product leader at Adobe who tapped me on the shoulder and said, Des, would you ever be interested in product marketing? And at the time, I was so nervous about product marketing, specifically because I thought it's super technical. It doesn't feel like I'm not a technical person. It felt like there was a lot of writing. And I was like, I am not strong in any of these things. And I had definitely imposter syndrome. I was like, there's no way. Even though I was doing marketing in other capacities, product marketing in particular just felt like it was a more difficult path for me. And sure enough, I decided to go through the interviews and went through it and fell in love with all the people I was going to be working with. And I took the leap and moved into product marketing. And that was the start of my career in PMM. And so long story short, I was very lucky to work on some really cool products from when Flash was still around. Unfortunately, Flash doesn't exist anymore, but covered Flash Media Server, got to do a lot of online video when online video was like really big, and worked with a lot of cool brands at the time. And then sure enough, I got another knock on the door, and this time it was from Google, and was really excited about the opportunity to kind of move into a whole different arena, which was advertising. So moved to Google, did Google Display Network for a few years, had my first child at Google, and then came back. And of course, like all things Google, everything changes when you get back from mat leave. And they said, Des, do you want to work on mobile apps? And I was scratching my head and I was like, what is mobile apps? I don't even know what that is. And so I started to do that and fell in love with the developer ecosystem. It became almost a passion of mine. I fell in love with the idea that a developer could create this app experience, and then the world would, of course, consume it in a big, big way. And so sure enough, went down that path, started to figure out what a narrative was for developer marketing across Google, worked with a lot of different teams. And then we positioned this actually to the CMO, who was Lorraine at the time, who still is the CMO. And at the time, they had other priorities, and they thought, this isn't like, the thing we want to focus on. And of course, my heart was broken because I was so in love with developers. And so I ended up applying for a role at Facebook because I was so frustrated because I wanted developer marketing to be a thing. And of course, Facebook called a couple of days later after I applied. And I told them, I said, listen, I'm actually not interested in this role. I want to run developer marketing for all of Facebook. They're like, oh, we don't have these issues. We work really well with all different teams. And they were, really adamant about this one specific role for me. And so I met with them many, many times. And then finally, at the last final hour, the person was like, hey, would you mind meeting with one of our leaders? Her name was Deb Liu. She ran Platform at the time. And I said, yeah, I would love to meet with her. So I did. And I pitched her this idea that I wanted to kind of run developer marketing, how I wanted to bring this like narrative to life. And she's like, get over here. I have a job for you. And sure enough, that's how I got to Meta, or Facebook. So I was there for 6.5 years. I covered developer marketing from all things and aspects of developer, from AI to open source to AR, VR. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience for me. And then my last part, or stint, I should say, at Meta, I had another executive tap me on the shoulder and said, hey, Des, we have this opportunity for you to run Workplace, which was like Facebook for work, but you have to move to London. And so sure enough, I took that role. I moved to London. I was there for a couple of years, fell in love with London. My husband's English, so it was like a perfect like opportunity for us to go see family as well. And then came back and was going to move actually over to WhatsApp. I was really excited. I was going to go move on the WhatsApp business. And a dear friend of mine, a mentor of mine said, hey, Des, what's next for you? And I said, well, I'm going to go do this WhatsApp thing. They're like, no. What are you going to do outside of Facebook? And I was like, well, I randomly got a ping from Shopify and they're like, you need to talk to them immediately. And I was like, really? So I came back and started to talk to the recruiter, and every meeting I had with Shopify just got more and more exciting. And I really loved, the hiring manager who's my boss today. And yeah, now I've been at Shopify for a year and a half, and it's been almost a year and a half, I should say. And it's been awesome. The commerce world is a really fun place to be. And I've really, really enjoyed just learning the space and wanting to do more, because we've barely scratched the surface. So that's where we're at.
Wow, that was an amazing story. And I loved, one thing that really stood out to me is how you just leaned in and like grasped every single opportunity. And it wasn't like, hey, this doesn't fit how you might have envisioned it, or what your path was very zigzaggy. And now as you lay it out, it all makes sense. Like, yeah, they're all building blocks, but in that moment, I'm sure it didn't make sense. You're just like, okay, this sounds interesting. Let me just go. And I think that's like, so often, like, we just think like this is the path, or like, oh, this feels scary, and so I'm not going to go do it. But it's actually those leaps that you take get you to like be really senior or have these like incredible experiences.
Definitely. I think that a lot of people really get comfortable with status quo. And I think it's important that sometimes you got to really kind of evaluate when an opportunity comes your way, if it's really worth it. And also if you're excited about it. Right. And so I've always trusted my gut on that. And it's always been pretty good so far.
That's great. I love that. I want to dive more into this. Like, I mean, I'm sure you've had so many inflection points in your career who like really shaped who you are and shaped your trajectory. What's one that really stands out to you, like an inflection point that has really impacted how you show up today?
Yeah, I've had a couple. I'm gonna say that one tap on the shoulder when I was at Adobe, where one of the executives reached out to me and said, hey, move to product marketing. And I think it goes back to this idea that like sometimes you think you yourself can't do something, but you absolutely can. And I remember again, in that moment, I was like, oh, it's so technical. How am I going to learn product? I feel like I have to be an engineer to understand product, or whatever it may be. And that one in particular was an important one for me, because it started my love for product marketing. I fell in love with this idea that I could convince someone to use a product. And that's like the core aspect of product marketing, right? It's like you have to learn everything about your audience, what makes them tick, what gets them excited, all those little nuances. And then you as the person have to then shape that story and that narrative. And I think storytelling is such an important vector of us being a marketer as well. But that's what made me fall in love with product marketing. And I never looked at it from that point of view. I always thought of it as like, oh, that seems so hard, and I don't think I could ever do that. And once I did that, it fell in place for me. It was like almost like a puzzle piece for me. So that was one specific inflection point. I have another one that's more about finding my voice. And I think that that's an important, for anybody listening, because I think it's a hard one, because as a woman, especially, working in tech, you do have these moments where you're like, I probably should just like not say anything, raise my hand, have any point of view. And I learned very early on that would not work for me as like my personality type as well too. So I remember very vividly, I was at Google and I was working on the mobile app ecosystem. And when I moved into that space, I became a detective. I literally went and spent all this time with different developers around the world. And I was very lucky to have that opportunity. And what I did find is all these little nuances about the business in general. And so we were at a big meeting. It was like a quarterly business review. And we had one of our VPs standing up talking about, one of the learnings that they heard about developers and what they wanted to do. And all of a sudden I looked around and I was like, everyone's just like nodding. And I was like, no, this is bullshit. Sorry. And sorry to use that word, but it was like, no. So I raised my hand, I stood up, and for like 15 minutes straight, I was talking about the things that I learned. And all of a sudden, everyone in that room was like flabbergasted, like their mouths were open, but more importantly, I think they were also like, wow, she knows her stuff. And after that meeting, I had the VP come up to me and was like, Des, you've got a point of view and we love it. We want more of this. And that was a very big turning point for me, because I realized that I didn't want to like just do the status quo. I think it's really important that you could like have a voice and not be afraid to share your thoughts or your ideas, because when you do take that moment or that leap of faith, it all kind of works out in your favor. So yeah.
Wow, that's powerful. I love that. I'm like now trying to picture myself back, when I was like early in my career, even now maybe, but like early in my career, going to like this humongous like company offsite at Google and just having just like, it's so intimidating being able to speak up. And so I love that you just recognize, hey, I do know what I'm talking about, and just stood up and owned it, and like continue to recognize that, and like really just speaking up and owning your voice. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's inspiring for like so many of us here. And so that's like, it's just an incredible story. And it really highlights, a key theme of what you were sharing here earlier is you kept getting tapped on the shoulder for opportunities.
Yep.
And I'd love to dive into like, how do you advocate for yourself? It's a big theme that comes up for us in the leadership program. I often hear from the women in the program. And I mean, I think many people struggle with this regardless of like who you are, to like afraid of showcasing wins or progress because they don't want to be seen as showing off or bragging. Yeah. But it is really important. And I see a really great question from Roxy, actually one of our graduates, in the Q&A around her saying, it sounds like there was a number of instances in your career where you were tapped on the shoulder, quote unquote.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you've done to position yourself to foster those relationships and stay on top of mind? So yeah, would love to hear from you. Like, how do you advocate for yourself and how do you get positioned for those opportunities?
It's funny. I was thinking, I just had this conversation with someone recently, and it was really around mentorship. And so it actually started mostly at Adobe, and I'll share a little bit about how it manifested. Is that I always looked for people within the organization that I respected, that I could learn from. And I would reach out to them saying, hey, could we have like a coffee and just like get to know them better? And more importantly, I would come to them with like, hey, I have this like specific problem and I'm trying to figure out how to solve for it. And I just want your advice on it. And every time I did that, I felt like I got, almost like an open door to have more conversations with different people within the organization. And it wasn't like, initially it was just more, someone had reached out to me saying, hey, Des, we have this person that we'd love to match you with. And I was like, great, I'd love to chat with them. And then once that happened, I was like, I could do this with other people. Like, why am I just tying it to one person?
For a mentorship kind of conversation?
That's right. It was like a mentorship opportunity. And then I realized like, it doesn't just have to be for mentorship. You could do this with anyone. Like anybody who reaches out to me, even today in my Shopify and all the Shopify folks that hear this today, I take any meeting. I never say no to anybody because I love the idea of meeting people. And it's also an opportunity to kind of hear about what they're working on. And maybe there's something that I can pique their interest, or they have some like question that they need some help on. I would love to help. And I think that's an important thing that we all should be doing in this ecosystem, no matter what, especially as a woman too. You want to help, be an advocate for other folks as well. So yeah, I think I learned that very early on, and that always continued to manifest at every company I worked at. Even at, Meta, I always, I was underneath one org, I always reached out to other parts of the org to get to know these, leaders, better. And again, no one says no to coffee. I mean, why would someone say no to coffee unless they're crazy busy and they're trying to get something out the door? But most people say yes. So one of my advices for everyone is make sure you reach out to folks. I bet you anything, they'd be more than likely to chat with you. So
I love that. Yeah. I've also found like people say yes, especially if you plan it like, hey, can I get coffee within a few weeks from now when their calendar is empty? If you're really trying to get coffee that week, then they're probably stressed and everything around it. But if you just like that, like little strategic tactical change can result in, and this is like super helpful. I mean, do you mind like sharing an example of how you've had this conversation or like what you're trying to talk to them about, especially when you are earlier in your career? So getting on the calendar, because not everyone is as generous with their time and as open as you are. And now I'm sure like you're getting a bunch of like calendar invites and you're like, what's going on?
I can't wait to talk to all of you. It's gonna be great.
Yeah. But like when you were earlier on, like how does that play out?
Yeah. So one in particular that actually two, I could say that it reminds me of like back in the day, I was working on a campaign that was pretty complex. It was like a global campaign, different audience sets. We were trying to figure out some like different funnel work. And so I went to the lead who like managed growth marketing at Adobe at the time. And I said, hey, we're working on this campaign. I'm struggling on trying to figure out something. do you have 5 minutes that we could like chat about this? Just to kind of, I'm thinking about approaching it this way, but I'd love to hear from you if I'm not thinking about it the right way. And that was the door opener for me. It was like, I was working on something very specific. I would love someone's domain expertise to kind of figure it out. And then another one, when I was actually at Meta, even though I sat in marketing, I reached out to partnerships, and Ime was the leader at the time. And I love Ime. And I reached out to him and said, hey, I'd love to chat with you because there's an opportunity for us to do more marketing within our partnership board. I want to figure out how we can actually work better together and figure out if there's a way that we can have a conduit where we meet once a month to see like all the things we're working on and what you guys are working on, and we can do more partnership work together. So I think it's just like thinking about your day-to-day work and how it ties back to that person that you would want to work with, because they're more than likely to give you advice. Of course, like that's what they do in, day out. So yeah, I would really think about it from that perspective.
I love that. And that's so organic. You're not going there and being like, hey, look at all the great things I've done. You're tying it back to like things that they're interested in, things that they would want to talk about, could help them to have that conversation. I'm sure like naturally within that conversation, they just get to see how impressive you are.
Yeah. And I think the number one thing I would say too is like, don't go in there without an agenda. Like any executive is going to freak out and be like, why are we just having this conversation? Like, you know what I mean? Make sure you're very clear about what you want to get out of the conversation. Super important. In fact, you probably want to even give that little nod before you meet with them so they know exactly what you're going to talk about when you meet. So it doesn't feel like it's a surprise either. So big, important vector for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that way they're also more impressed with you coming in the door if they're just like, okay, she's prepared, she's on top of it.
And then they're more, yeah, exactly. And they're more likely to meet with you again because of it. So, and keep it consistent as well.
Yes. And are these the kind of conversations that you're having that led you to be top of mind for people? So when they did hear about interesting opportunities, they would be like, oh, let me think about Des. Is that how you were getting top of mind?
I think so. Yes, that's exactly how.
That plus good work. Yeah,
it did. And you know, it's funny. You work on projects. You end up, of course, working with XFN partners. They get a sense of you and your work, and then, of course, these partnerships that you meet or mentors that you meet then help like kind of pave the way for you a little bit too.
Yeah, and that's such a common theme I think for so many people who've moved up. Pretty much everybody. I think it's just like creating those relationships, sharing your work. If you don't share it, then no one's gonna know what you're bringing to the table.
Totally.
Very important to happen. Yeah. And, you know, like I would love to like, you know, right now in the world, these are just like really uncertain times. And so I'd like to like pivot a little bit on like, how do you advocate for yourself, but how do you advocate for yourself in these times? You know, there are layoffs, as we were talking right before this, like so many of our friends, unfortunately, have gotten laid off. There's budget cuts. There's so much other tragic, sad things happening in the world right now. And, you know, at companies where things are just more tense, tight, what advice do you have for our ambitious listeners who want to keep moving up, but they're not sure, how do I seek for that promotion or growth opportunity without sounding insensitive or like rubbing people the wrong way? So how do you think about that?
You know, this is a very interesting time. It's probably, you know, the most unique that I've ever seen in my career as well too. And as you all know, is like, there's so many layoffs happening across the tech industry as a whole, but in general, I think there's this new way of looking at how you run a business. And I think that a lot of these big entities are really kind of changing their mindset about how they operationalize and how they do day-to-day work. I think what's really interesting, there's like a couple things that are in motion right now. One is like, you know, with all the dawn of all these new tools that are coming into play, especially now with the dawn of AI, it's really changed the game on like how to get things done and to do it quickly. I mean, I don't know, November 30th was a big day for me. ChatGPT launched that day and I'm addicted. And if you guys don't know what that is, go check it out. But it's amazing to see that there's this new set of tools that are happening. And I think because of that, tech organizations are looking at how do they optimize, because there's been so many different kinds of layers of work that has to get done, of course. And, you know, with the dawn of these new tools, it's going to change everything. The paradigm is going to change. So I would say this, my biggest advice for folks who are either looking at the growing in their career and trying to get promotions in this uncertain time, one of the things I'm actually really kind of excited about this a little bit, and I'll tell you why. I think anyone should start to kind of be more doing more crafter work. And what I mean by that is like going to do like the IC work, even though you might be a manager, or even if you're not a manager yet, but going to learn some of these new tools that are out there. Because if you become really proficient in some of these areas, that you're able to do things on your own without the reliance of other teams, That's what people are looking for. They want to see these optimizations. They want to see people who have domain expertise. And I'll give you an example of just one that I look in the marketing lens of the world. Creating a video is not easy. You have to find a producer, you got to get a set, you got to do, content writing for it. Like there's all these different aspects of it. But I am impressed in the last 6 months of seeing all of these different tools that are out there that you can create a video now all on your own. Even myself, I've been doing that, as like learning and trying to figure it out. And as I mentioned, even with all these AI tools. And so I'm a big believer that the way that we are going to be able to, move and grow is to learn some of these, crafter things as individual contributors or as managers, or learning that with your team as well. And that's going to continue to help you grow in your career. I know it's a crazy way to kind of talk about advice for your career, but I really believe in that. I've been pushing my own team to start thinking in these ways as well too.
Oh, I love that. So it's about kind of finding these skills, these craft skills, whatever that is related to your industry or function.
Yeah. And to be more efficient about it. I think that in the past, there's always been, people are looking at cutting costs. They're looking at trying to figure out shrinking headcount. But if you're able to operationalize the same work with less, that is what companies want to see. That's exactly what they want to see. So you having that power and learning to do it on your own. And let me tell you, some of these tools are super simple. I mean, I'm impressed with some of the things that are out there today that in the past would have taken me weeks to do. And now I can do in 20 minutes, which is pretty insane.
Wow, that's really awesome. Nice. And, kind of I love that. It kind of going with the theme of how do you advocate for yourself in these times, continuing that. What about, if someone is seeking promotion or wants to ask for growth opportunity, how do they frame it in these times? Still be sensitive to here's everything that's happening in the company, but still continue to seek the growth, even if it's modified.
Yeah, I would always say, think about how you're showing impact to the business. That's the number one vector for all of this right now, because as you know, all leaders, all companies right now are looking at how do they bring their costs down? How do they operationalize and really just kind of, being able to be more efficient. I think that's the number one thing. We see all these headlines in the news right now about how they're trying to do more layoffs. And the reason being is that they feel like there's just too many layers of people and work getting done. So if you're able to have a conversation with your manager about, hey, if I do this, I can operationalize and be more efficient because of XYZ, that's more of a conversation that they're going to be likely to want to hear versus just saying, I want a promotion. You know what I mean? So if you can prove that and show that, I think it's going to be super, super valuable, especially during this time.
Yeah, for sure. Focusing on the efficiencies, focusing on how can you help the company grow, or how can you help your manager look good in these
That's
times?
right. That's right. And that's why I think learning these skill sets that are part of your domain expertise are going to be so valuable and very helpful. It also, for me, I'm a constant learner. So it's kind of fun to go and learn something new that I haven't been able to play with before in the past. And I would recommend everyone out there to start playing with any tool that's tied to your domain expertise, because I'm telling you, that's going to help you be a better, marketer or whatever domain that you're in.
I think it's so important. Continue to revisit it instead of just assuming oh, I'm done.
Yeah. Or that you've known the same channels that you've always been doing forever and ever. And gosh, everything's changing constantly. So always be on top of your game, basically.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned ChatGPT. My sister got married a couple months ago over the holidays, and I used it to help me write my sister's speech. I mean, I definitely, obviously I write my own stuff, but I was let me just see what would happen if I put this through ChatGPT. It was actually pretty good.
It's amazing. I mean, literally.
Impressed.
Oh yeah, I play with it every day. It is one of the coolest technologies out there. And this is just the beginning of what's possible with AI. And as I said, it's whatever your domain is, there's probably some AI tool out there that can help you be more efficient. So go find it, learn it, become proficient in it, and then also share that with your team internally. And I'm telling you, those are things they're going to look at for growth and opportunities for your business.
Yeah. And if you're seen as the person who's forward thinking, that's so valuable in itself. And you can be the one who's teaching your team, even if you're not. I think that's a good thing to call out. Even if you're not in that leadership position, you're an IC or you're one of the more junior people on your team.
Yeah.
Getting that recognition for someone being the forward thinker, anyone can do this. You don't have to have that formal title to make it happen. Right.
You want to be a leader, and then people will follow because of it. So I'm a big believer of go find something, share it with everyone, and be wow, look what I just did. And I think people love that. So yeah, I think everyone should try to do that.
Amazing. Thank you. I think the chat's also loving it. Like so much helpful advice, all these like emojis popping up. So thank you for sharing all this. And anyone listening in, if you have more questions for Des, drop it in the Q&A icon that's in the bottom right of your screen around how to advocate for yourself or anything that she's talked about. This is like just Des has so many good like wisdom bombs. So I just want to hear it all from you. So as you have questions, throw it in. One question I also have for you is, we often celebrate we often celebrate successes, but don't share our failures.
Yeah.
And, but as we both know, knowing how to overcome failure is critical to being successful. Everybody has them. What's a failure that you've had in your career that you've really learned from?
Well, listen, I've had lots of failures. I want everyone to know no one's perfect. There's no, I think it could be little things or big things. And I'll share like all the little things. And then of course I'll share big things too. So on the small side, like even just recently, we just launched a big, project at Shopify, and we were testing out different channels to see, what could be a really cool way to kind of broaden the awareness around it. And there was one channel that just failed miserably, even though we put a lot of work and effort into it. And so I'm a big believer in failure is not a negative. Failure is a learning point. This means that you're only going to get better because you learned that, hey, this didn't work and I'm going to do it differently next time. And I believe in that. I think there's a big nuance though. I think you can make mistakes, but you don't make multiple mistakes all the time, right? You learn from your mistake and then you continually optimize around it, right? I think one big one for me is that I probably stayed in a role too long with a manager that I, felt like wasn't very supportive. And I felt at that time I was really stuck in my career. And at that time, I kept saying, I got to keep trying and trying. And I probably stayed maybe a year too long. And I've learned now that, and why it's not a failure point in the sense of like, I failed at the job itself. I failed in like my own growth goals that I had for myself, if that makes sense. So I kept trying and trying, even though I felt like it just wasn't the right fit. And I'm a big, big believer that your manager is your most important vehicle in your career. I chose my manager at the current company that I'm at. I wanted to work with him. I felt like, I was going to learn a ton, and I am. And I think that's why I'm here. And my biggest advice for anyone on the call is, make sure that when you take a role that you're working for someone that you're going to learn from, that you believe in, that also is supportive of you, because it's such an important vector as part of your career. Oh, I don't hear you.
Sorry, I was saying, I love that. I think that's so relatable how so many of us have stayed in a job for longer just because it was the easier thing to do, or you're like, oh, I hope it gets better, it's not that bad. But especially having I 100% agree on, like, managers are like, having a bad manager really impacts your growth. So if you're not in a position,
it does. And it really, I look back on that time and it wasn't, you really want to try your best, right? And you're thinking like, maybe this is on me. But now as I reflect, I'm like, there's so many signs that I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I see that earlier? And it could have been different. But at the same time, I felt like it was such a learning moment for me that now, whatever role I take, my manager is the most important vector for me as a person, because it helps with my career going forward. So my biggest advice for everyone, make sure you pick your manager.
I love that. I love that. And, on a tangent, I see a question that in the chat around like finding mentors. So,
Yeah.
Hopefully your manager can be a great mentor, but of course also we should also find people outside.
Yeah.
And so the question is, I struggle with finding mentors outside of my current company. How have you seeked out mentors outside of the company? Like, what's the best way to do this?
Guys, there are so many groups out there. Not even just on LinkedIn, but even Facebook groups. There's one I'm going to do a shout out actually for a Facebook group that anyone in the marketing world can sign up for. It's called Marketers in Tech. It just got started by one of my ex-bosses at Meta. And, I think it's really great to find communities. I think communities are really, really important as part of whatever role that you're in, whatever domain expertise, and there's plenty out there. So I'm a big believer, go find them and seek them out and be vocal in those communities. People want to meet with people. People want to talk with each other. And I think that's a great way to do it from like outside of your organization. The other thing that's also, I'm a big believer of like, you might have left a company from your past, but stay in touch with those folks as well too. It's an important part of like your career aspect as well too, to continue those relationships. So I would say it from that point of view is another good way.
Yeah, I really love all of that. And, one last thing, if I may add here, is that it's also like, it's really important to find mentors, but don't stop yourself if you can't find a mentor. Like, even watching Des here speak, we can learn so much from her about like, how does she carry herself? How does she present herself? What about her experiences? And that in itself is so valuable. So like, please like do all those things that Des just shared. And then also just watch other people, like try to learn from them from a distance. And that itself can be so helpful.
Definitely, definitely. And yeah, I mean, I also have to say, like, this general ecosystem is very all about connections, you know what I mean? And so, meeting people, talking to people, also just how you come across is like another really important vector as well, too. So if you're always curious, people love that. Like, I don't think there's going to be anyone who says, oh, this person is like, too curious.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're always willing to help in any way. So yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. Last question for you, and we're going to end this on a pretty strong, powerful note. So, as I see a question in the Q&A, as a woman, how do we balance showing authority and empathy and compassion at the same time without being perceived as quote unquote bitchy? And I really love the question because this actually comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Around, and I'm sure like you face this bias too. I faced it, and this comes up a lot in our leadership program. It's like, how do you balance that? There's this double bind. So what are some strategies that you've used, or what advice do you have for us?
I think it's an important one to be authentic to who you are. Never try to be something else. And what I mean by that is that, I've always been outspoken. I'm not going to lie. It's definitely part of my personality trait. But I also think it's important to also have empathy and care for the people that you work with as well, too. So be authentic. Never try to be a different personality type, because people can smell that. They can see it right off the bat. They really can. I also think it is a fine line. It's a hard one. Like, being a woman in tech is not easy sometimes. And trust me, I've been in meetings before where I have people talking over me, don't even pay attention to me. And there's like subtle cues that you can do. And one that's like one of my favorites. If you guys know who Fiji Simo is, she's the CEO of Instacart. She used to work at Meta, and I saw her dominate a room, and I've never seen anything like it before. And I'm going to share it with you because it was so good. She's French, by the way. And so she's also very little but like powerful, very, very powerful. So she was in a meeting where all these men, of course, were speaking and talking over each other. And she just raised her hand. And all of a sudden people started noticing that she raised her hand, and they're like, yes, Fiji. And then she just dominated that room. And it was so impressive to watch. Something as subtle as that. It wasn't even like trying to overtake or, talk over somebody. It was just that subtle thing. And to this day, it's been such an inspiration to me, and something just to be mindful of like when you're in these conversations, you don't have to like be tough or hard. You could just do these subtle cues that allow you to then have that voice or to have the floor. Yeah.
Wow, I love that. That is so simple. I mean, it's just like what we used to do when we were kids at school.
Exactly. I know. Just raise your hand. People are gonna be like, why is she raising her hand?
Yeah, I love that. And you can do that virtually too. You can use the hand raise feature if you're having trouble getting into it. And something like I actually Samia, she's the one who introduced us, another just like rock star. And she told me this tip around like, get up and like walk over to the whiteboard. Like, does that movement also attracts people's eyes and like is a way to like capture people's attention. So yeah, you're so right. Like these subtle cues that aren't as like, don't seem as hard to go implement, but can be so powerful.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, even though on, whatever platform you use and you raise your hand, actually doing it physically where someone's like, why are they doing that? Is probably a little bit more powerful than just the tools that you have regularly, because they're like, what's going on? Like, what are they doing? Like, it's a different thing. Right. So, yeah, big believer of that.
That's so true. Right now, when you raise your hand, like you can see it in virtual, and then you're like, okay, that's attention grabbing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, Des, thank you so much. These have been so many wisdom bombs. Like I can just like the chat, like I tell like how much they're loving it. Big thank you for opening up and just sharing your experience and just being so real about it. You're amazing.
Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. This has been fun. And yeah, let me know if I can answer any other questions. Happy to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you all of you for listening in. The chat has been on fire. As before we wrap up, I'm curious, like what's a takeaway or one thing you want to remember from our conversation today? Drop it in the chat. What's something that you want to remember from our conversation today? Maybe it's like hand raising to get people's attention when people are talking over you. Maybe it's around like owning your voice. We covered so much. How do you like ask for growth opportunities in the moment of uncertainty? really developing this new craft, authenticity, how to advocate for yourself, utilizing AI, always be advocating, seizing the opportunity. Ooh, this is like really great themes coming across. Owning your knowledge, taking that leap, coming to meetings with an agenda, saying yes to opportunities. Amazing. Taking opportunities that are presented to you. This is so inspiring, Des. I think especially in these times, it's a breath of fresh air just hearing from you and just like really practical advice. So thank you so much again for joining us.
Of course. Thank you guys. I really appreciate it. Thank you again.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for joining, for attending, for like the great energy, the questions. We will send out the recording and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you again, Des. Thank you, everyone. Take care. Bye, all.
Bye.